It is not news that Apple Inc. likes to assert that its supply chain is worldwide and that they are not so dependent on production in China. In reality, Apple is highly dependent on China for production, which has been difficult for investors, customers, and even the company during the COVID-19 pandemic. The issue of their dependence on China was very noticeable during Apple's second quarter conference call last week, when the company voiced concern that supply shortages, majorly caused by COVID-19 lockdowns in China, might result in as much as $8 billion in sales reductions. That will be the same as losing all iPad sales for a quarter. To reduce reliance on Foxconn-led Taiwanese assemblers, Apple Inc. appeared to have instructed suppliers to actively plan on assembling their products elsewhere in Asia, primarily in India and Vietnam. Unrest at iPhone City in Zhengzhou, where over 3,000 workers construct iPhones and other Apple devices, as a Foxconn-run facility, which produces more than 80% of the overall iPhone Pro lineup, prompted the decision. Workers dissatisfied with their wages and the COVID-19 limits broke the law and attacked the authorities in November 2022 at the Zhengzhou factory. Because of COVID-19 limitations and low pay, disgruntled workers can be seen on camera shouting, "Stand up against your rights," and hurling items. All these factors are significant threats to Apple, which is heavily dependent on the Zhengzhou factory as a reliable production base. According to reports, Apple no longer feels comfortable with so much of its operations being centered in one area. So no, Apple is not relocating production owing to concerns about human rights breaches, censorship, or other forms of injustice. According to TF International securities analyst Ming-Chi Kuo, the company plans to supply between 40 and 45% of its devices from India, up from a single-digit percentage now. Other Apple products such as AirPods, smartwatches, and laptops are all expected to be manufactured in Vietnam. During the conference call, Apple CEO Tim Cook underlined that the company's supply chain is truly global and that its products are manufactured all over the world, including in the United States. However, the company may relocate most of its manufacturing outside of China. Cook also mentioned that Apple is paying close attention to this, noting that more and more chips are locally manufactured. Many of Apple's components get sourced from nations other than China. They're manufactured in countries such as the United States, India, Vietnam, Japan, and others. The assembly process, often known as FATP in the manufacturing industry and within Apple, is the main bottleneck in production. FATP is an abbreviation for final assembly, testing, and packaging. The vast majority of Apple products are manufactured in China. Because of this, your MacBook Pro or iPhone most certainly has "assembled in China" written on it. Cook introduced the concept of centralizing assembly in the country as components arrived from all around the world. For years, the model allowed Apple to profit from cheaper labor costs and favorable government policies, while also increasing its market share among Chinese consumers. According to people familiar with the negotiations, Apple has instructed its manufacturing partners to seek to complete more of this work outside of China. According to supply chain experts, unless India and Vietnam can execute new product introductions, NPIs, they'll be obliged to play a secondary role. According to several individuals involved in the discussions, the failing global economy and Apple's stalled recruiting have made it difficult for the technology giant to allocate people for NPI work with new suppliers and nations. Apple and China have spent many years binding themselves together in a mutually beneficial relationship until lately. Change doesn't happen overnight. Every year, Apple releases new iPhone models and frequent software updates for its iPads, Macs, and other products. The plane must continue to fly whilst one engine is being replaced. It's not easy to collect all of the components to develop at the scale that Apple requires. Nonetheless, the shift is already starting, spurred by two interconnected reasons that threaten China's long-standing economic success. Young Chinese people are no longer interested in working for low wages to produce goods for the wealthy. They are outraged, partly because of Beijing's oppressive COVID-19 policy, which is a significant source of concern for Apple and many other Western firms. Even after 3 years of the discovery of COVID-19, China is still working to contain outbreaks through quarantines and other measures, whereas most countries have returned to pre-pandemic levels. Apple, on the other hand, is now highly vulnerable to the COVID-19 lockdowns that are enveloping China. factories have gone bankrupt, and shipping costs have soared. In recent weeks, numerous assembly zones have been plagued with COVID restrictions. As a result, workers have been producing Apple products at an even slower rate, resulting in significantly reduced inventory and poorer sales in the most recent quarter. According to Apple CFO Luca Maestri, the setbacks have also made some Chinese buyers less keen to buy Apple products. If this was a one-time scenario, Apple could quickly deal with it, make a few changes and move on. However, Apple's China-based assembly process has been riddled with problems for years before the outbreak. In an unprecedented move at the time, Apple announced in 2019 that holiday quarter revenues would be lower than expected. There were supply chain concerns with the iPad, Apple Watch, AirPods, and MacBook Air. Tariffs were imposed on Apple products during the Trump administration due to trade issues with China. This is because they're manufactured in China and sent to the United States for purchase. When the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus struck in 2020, the first wave of lockdowns again disrupted Apple's supply chain, and the iPhone SE and iPhone 12 were among the devices that were affected. In 2021, Apple reported that the chip shortage and other supply distributions cost the company millions and millions of dollars. COVID-19 lockdowns affecting Foxconn Technology Group and other final assembly partners in 2022, along with a lingering chip shortage and the Ukraine-Russia crisis, threatened to wipe off $4 to $8 billion in revenue from the June quarter. Despite the evident negative impact of China on Apple's ability to sell items and bring in revenue, Cook stood firm in his support of the production model he established. Cook stated that the supply chain has been extraordinarily resilient when taking a step back and zooming out to see how it has fared. He also talked about how the chip supply concerns have been a strain for everyone, but he believes the company has done an excellent job of navigating through the pandemic phase of it. That is correct. Analysts forecast $62 billion in revenue from these goods in the third quarter, despite the firm producing more than $80 billion in revenue from hardware alone in the second quarter of 2022. However, an $8 billion barrier is still an $8 billion barrier, and Apple has never shied away from finding solutions. Apple has been gradually shifting away from conducting all of its final assembly in China. Some components of the 2019 Mac Pro are being assembled in the United States. Meanwhile, in Malaysia, many new Mac Studio configurations are being assembled. While the most recent AirPods models are being manufactured in Vietnam, some M1 iMac models are in Ireland and Thailand. The company's most well-known products, the iPhone, iPad, and Apple Watch, are still primarily manufactured in China. Apple has made more efforts to increase iPhone production, including partial manufacturing of iPhone 13 models in Brazil. Some devices have also been assembled in India for a few years. However, the number of iPhones assembled outside China is not yet significant. Apple reportedly only produced 1 million iPhones in India in the first quarter of 2022, despite selling an estimated 60 million units during that quarter. It's impossible to say how long Apple's current problems in China will last, and even if they're rapidly tackled, there will likely always be a new obstacle to tackle. To diversify the final assembly of its products, I believe Apple should work with its partner organizations to find new ones, to develop more plants in Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, Ireland, India, Brazil, and possibly the United States. Cook has long maintained that he prefers to perform final assembly in China due to labor costs and manufacturing expertise. Profits may suffer if the company leaves China, but so will disruptions. Apple recently increased its dividend and added $90 billion to its share buyback program. On its earnings call, Apple was asked if it would ever make a large purchase rather than continue to return cash to its shareholders. Cook remarked that the company is always looking for a good bargain. However, the development of a new, much more international final assembly chain and a greater push towards automated production may be better used for those billions. Some retail workers believe Apple is cutting money by launching this scheme. The firm is gradually hiring geniuses who provide technical assistance and creative staff members who handle training. The change is most likely part of the company's ongoing trend to perform more maintenance services offline. For the past few years, Apple has been repairing Macs and Apple Watches in depots across the United States and other countries. As a result, The company's demand for tech support workers at its retail stores is declining. However, having fewer masterminds can deteriorate the user experience over time. The first iPhone 14s emerged from Apple's most recent production line in Chennai, India in the fourth quarter of 2022. That doesn't appear to be headline news, and I can see why. For quite some time, the company has been manufacturing phones in India, all of which cater to the substantial domestic market. It is, however, a noteworthy accomplishment because it is the first time that Apple has assembled a new iPhone outside of China within the same year it was introduced to the market. Disentangling Apple's success from Sino-American ties is a significant step in one of Apple's critical initiatives. India is the world's second largest smartphone market, and analysts believe this indicates a shift in Apple's assembly model. The issue is where those flagship plants will be located. Apple has substantial and deep manufacturing links with China. China generates the most cutting-edge technologies because it has the most advanced manufacturing capability in the world. Apple has attempted to replicate this capability elsewhere throughout the years. Most notably, the company chose Texas in 2013 to manufacture the trash can Mac Pro, a professional desktop computer that was compact, cylindrical, and failed to launch. However, 6 years later in 2019, Quanta Computer released its Chinese counterpart. There are numerous reasons why the company is moving away from China. Some of these are centered on the tail risk, which is how to protect yourself from very negative, low-probability scenarios. Relying on authoritarian governments to operate logically and reliably can backfire, as proven by the invasion of Ukraine. It may be challenging to picture the United States attempting to apply penalties comparable to those imposed on Russia against China, but Apple will be planning for it. Despite human rights campaigners' accusations, Apple has managed to strike a difficult balance between supporting the Chinese government's domestic censorship and rights breaches by blocking apps such as Grindr, the New York Times, and HKMap, while avoiding harsh criticism from Western governments and activists for its cooperation. However, a new crisis could arise at any time, exacerbating the incompatibilities in its stance. Furthermore, the production represents only a small portion of Apple's exposure to China. According to the company's most current figures, Greater China accounted for more than 17% of total revenues in the most recent quarter. Even with a GDP per capita of $10,000, a billion-person country has a prosperous middle class that is significantly greater than the total population of the United Kingdom. Apple cannot afford to lose that market, no matter how diverse its manufacturing has become. This indicates that the story is not over, rather, it is just beginning. And that brings us to the end of this video. How significant do you think the impact of Apple's move out of China will be on the economy? Let us know in the comments section. Remember to like, subscribe, and click on the notification bell to get notified when we post a new video.